May 28, 1940. Within the grand, yet increasingly claustrophobic, confines of the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, supreme commander of the Luftwaffe, and a man synonymous with Nazi Germany's early military triumphs, received a piece of intelligence from across the Atlantic. The report detailed an extraordinary declaration made just 12 days prior by U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. On May 16th, facing a Europe consumed by war and with Britain on the brink, Roosevelt had issued an audacious call to action. The United States, still officially neutral, would escalate its aircraft production to an unprecedented 50,000 military planes per year. This was a figure that dwarfed the combined output of all major powers and represented a nearly 14-fold increase over America's own 1939 production. Göring, a man whose personal vanity was matched only by his profound ideological arrogance, reportedly regarded this intelligence with utter disdain. He set the dispatch down, a sneer twisting his features as he scoffed, his voice resonating with incredulity and contempt. 50,000 planes? The Americans can only make refrigerators and razor blades. This dismissive declaration, more than a casual insult, revealed a fatal strategic blindness. Fueled by a virulent racial and political bias, Göring, and indeed much of the Nazi high command, fundamentally underestimated the industrial might of a free market democracy and its unparalleled capacity for rapid, adaptive mobilization. This arrogance, born of a perceived cultural and technological superiority, would prove to be one of the most catastrophic miscalculations of the war. While Reich Marshal Göring confidently dismissed American industrial potential, the relentless advance of the Wehrmacht through Western Europe was forcing a stark, urgent recalculation in Washington, D.C. Less than 3 weeks after Göring's cynical pronouncement, on May 16, 1940, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before a joint session of Congress. His address, delivered as France teetered on the brink of collapse, was a profound declaration, a direct counter-narrative to the Axis belief in their industrial and military supremacy. Roosevelt's words, devoid of ambiguity, resonated with an almost audacious clarity. We must have more planes. We must build them quickly. We must, in many cases, build them overseas. We are calling for an immediate program for the construction of 50,000 planes. This target, 50,000 aircraft annually, was not merely ambitious, it was, by any contemporary industrial metric, staggering. To contextualize the scale of this challenge, the entire United States aviation industry had produced a mere 3715 military aircraft in 1939. Roosevelt's demand represented a 14-fold increase, an anticipated output that dwarfed the combined production capabilities of every major global power. It was an industrial and logistical gauntlet thrown down, demanding an unprecedented mobilization of national resources, labor, and innovative spirit. The task was monumental: to transform a peacetime economy, still emerging from the Great Depression, into the arsenal of democracy on a scale previously unimaginable. This was not merely an expansion of existing capacities, it was a fundamental re-engineering of the nation's industrial core, undertaken with the immense pressure of a rapidly escalating global conflict. Achieving this unprecedented output required more than just political will. It demanded a revolutionary transformation of American industry. To spearhead this colossal undertaking, President Roosevelt turned to a titan of American manufacturing, William S. Knudsen. The former president of General Motors, Knudsen possessed an unparalleled understanding of large-scale industrial processes and assembly line efficiency. His commitment to the national effort was absolute, accepting the critical role of Director General of the Office of Production Management for the symbolic salary of $1 per year. The challenge before Knudsen and his newly formed agency was monumental. It was not merely about increasing existing military production, but about fundamentally reorienting an entire peacetime economy. Factories that had been accustomed to churning out automobiles, refrigerators, and washing machines now faced the daunting prospect of manufacturing complex war material, tanks, ships, and, most critically, thousands upon thousands of combat aircraft. This was an industrial conversion on a scale previously unimaginable, demanding an audacious leap from consumer goods to sophisticated weaponry. Knudsen's strategic vision for overcoming this immense hurdle was clear. Apply the proven tenets of automotive mass production, standardized parts, interchangeable components, and continuous assembly lines, to the intricate process of aircraft construction. This meant breaking down the monolithic task of building an entire bomber into smaller, manageable subassemblies, each produced by specialized teams and then integrated with relentless efficiency. It was a radical departure from the traditional artisanal methods of aircraft manufacturing, which had historically relied on skilled craftsmen meticulously building each plane largely by hand. The very concept of a production line for something as complex as a B-24 bomber was revolutionary, and the logistical hurdles inherent in its implementation were immense. The transformation of America's industrial landscape from a peacetime consumer economy to a titan of wartime production was not a smooth, linear progression. It was instead a relentless uphill battle fraught with unprecedented challenges that tested the very limits of industrial ingenuity and national resolve. The conversion of automobile plants, refrigerator factories, and even sewing machine workshops into facilities capable of producing precision aircraft components was a logistical and engineering nightmare. Massive stamping presses designed for car body panels had to be entirely reconfigured for aircraft skins, demanding significantly higher tolerances and different metallurgical properties. New jigs, fixtures, and specialized machine tools, often requiring entirely novel designs, had to be fabricated from scratch or repurposed with immense difficulty. Concurrently, the nation grappled with a severe shortage of skilled labor. Millions of men were being drafted into the armed forces, necessitating the urgent training of a new industrial workforce. Women and minority groups, historically marginalized from heavy industry, stepped into these critical roles, but their integration required extensive, rapid vocational education programs. This influx of inexperienced personnel initially led to significant quality control issues and slower production rates, as the complex intricacies of aerospace manufacturing were mastered across countless new facilities. The envisioned assembly lines, while conceptually revolutionary for bombers, initially sputtered under the immense weight of coordinating hundreds of thousands of parts from myriad subcontractors, each facing their own production bottlenecks, creating a vast and complex supply chain labyrinth. As America grappled with these growing pains and painstakingly laid the groundwork for its industrial war machine, across the Atlantic, the Axis powers observed with a mixture of disdain and ideological blindness. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, still deeply dismissive of American industrial capacity, famously declared in 1940, "The Americans can't build planes, they can only build refrigerators and razor blades." This pronouncement encapsulated a deeply ingrained prejudice within the Nazi high command. They viewed American society as decadent, racially mixed, and fundamentally incapable of the unified, disciplined effort required for total war. Accurate intelligence reports detailing the rapid expansion of American factory floor space and the initial ramp-up of aircraft production were often dismissed or heavily discounted. These warnings, which should have triggered alarm bells in Berlin, instead bounced off a wall of deeply entrenched racial and political ideology. The Germans believed their own superior industrial efficiency, underpinned by state control and forced labor, would easily outmatch what they perceived as the chaotic, profit-driven capitalist system of the United States. This profound miscalculation, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of arrogance and racial dogma, would prove to be one of the Third Reich's most catastrophic strategic blunders, ultimately underestimating the very force that would contribute decisively to its downfall. The strategic imperative was clear: translate raw material and human will into an aerial armada. But the practical execution demanded an industrial revolution on an unprecedented scale. No single project better encapsulated this audacious ambition or its initial brutal realities than Ford's Willow Run bomber plant. Conceived by Henry Ford himself, a man whose pioneering work in automotive mass production had reshaped the 20th century, Willow Run was not merely a factory. It was a sprawling industrial city dedicated to the consolidated B-24 Liberator. Stretching over 65 acres under one roof with a final assembly line a mile long, it was designed to ingest raw materials at one end and eject fully operational four-engine heavy bombers at the other, at rates previously unimaginable. However, the theoretical elegance of this vision collided violently with the practicalities of wartime production. The initial phase at Willow Run was frankly disastrous. Ford's automotive engineers, masters of stamping identical parts for simpler vehicles, grappled with the intricate, highly specialized tolerances required for aircraft. Skilled labor was scarce. The workforce, largely drawn from rural areas or first-time industrial workers, many of them women new to the factory floor, required intensive training from the ground up. Design modifications flowed incessantly from the combat theaters, demanding constant retooling and adaptation. Supply chains, stretched thin across a continent now reorienting for war, proved unreliable. These bottlenecks manifested in a chaotic dance of unfinished fuselages, missing components, and production lines that sputtered rather than flow. Yet, within this maelstrom of inefficiency, the very spirit of American ingenuity and perseverance shone brightest. Engineers, supervisors, and workers alike refused to yield. They meticulously identified choke points, redesigned workflows, and innovated solutions on the fly. They developed specialized jigs and fixtures, refined assembly techniques, and implemented rigorous quality control measures, transforming a system designed for cars into one capable of building complex aerial fortresses. The journey from blueprints to functional aircraft at Willow Run was a microcosm of America's broader industrial mobilization, a monumental undertaking fraught with peril but ultimately propelled forward by an unwavering national resolve. The initial conversion of America's automotive giants into armament factories was, as expected, a gargantuan undertaking fraught with production bottlenecks and logistical nightmares. Willow Run, Ford's monumental bomber plant, in particular, struggled through a period of intense disarray, its vast assembly lines initially producing a mere trickle of B-24 Liberators. But this was merely the crucible. What followed was a testament to American industrial ingenuity and an unyielding will to adapt. Through relentless process optimization, daring engineering modifications, and the sheer grit of its workforce, Willow Run began to fulfill its extraordinary promise. By April 1944, the plant, once derided for its inefficiency, was an operational marvel. It wasn't just producing B-24s, it was churning them out at an astonishing rate. One complete B-24 Liberator bomber rolled off the assembly line every 63 minutes. This unprecedented output, totaling 428 aircraft in that single month, surpassed the entire monthly production of the German aviation industry. This phenomenon was not confined to Willow Run. Across the nation, former refrigerator factories were building Grumman F4F Wildcats, automobile plants were assembling North American P-51 Mustangs, and agricultural machinery companies were fabricating Boeing B-29 Superfortresses. The principles of mass production, honed by generations of American industry, were unleashed with devastating effectiveness. What Göring had dismissed as an impossibility had become a strategic reality, an industrial juggernaut capable of generating an aerial armada on a scale the world had never witnessed. By 1944, the American miracle of production had ceased to be a mere aspiration and transformed into an undeniable, overwhelming reality on a scale that defied all pre-war predictions. In that single pivotal year, the United States manufactured a staggering 96,270 aircraft. This wasn't merely an impressive number, it was a strategic declaration. To put this in stark context, this single year's output surpassed the entire aircraft production of Nazi Germany throughout the entirety of World War II. Germany, a nation renowned for its industrial prowess and military efficiency, simply could not compete with this industrial juggernaut. This exponential growth was not confined solely to final assembly plants like Willow Run. It was a systemic transformation, a vast ecosystem of interconnected industries operating at unprecedented scales. Aluminum foundries poured molten metal with relentless precision. Steel mills churned out sheets and girders at rates previously unimaginable. And precision electronics factories produced millions of components crucial for navigation and targeting systems. Engine manufacturers, the very heart of these aerial behemoths, scaled their output exponentially, delivering power plants in quantities that dwarfed any other nation's capabilities. The logistical backbone supporting this colossal effort, the railways, the trucking fleets, the skilled labor force, all grew in tandem, ensuring a continuous, uninterrupted flow from raw material to finished warplane, solidifying an air supremacy that would prove decisive. While the factories roared with unprecedented output, the true engine of this industrial miracle was not merely steel and machinery, but human resolve. As millions of American men were mobilized for combat, a vast untapped reservoir of labor stepped forward: women. By 1943, women constituted an astonishing 65% of the aircraft manufacturing workforce, a demographic transformation that profoundly reshaped the industrial landscape. This widespread integration of women into heavy industry stood in stark contrast to the rigidly patriarchal and ideologically stunted labor policies of Nazi Germany. Hitler's regime, clinging to archaic notions of women's roles, primarily confined them to domestic duties or at best agricultural work, severely limiting their industrial war effort. Göring's earlier dismissive remarks about American industrial capacity failed to account for this fundamental difference in societal mobilization. These Rosies, a collective symbol of resilience and skill, were not just filling vacant positions, they were mastering complex tasks, from precision welding and operating heavy machinery to intricate wiring and, of course, riveting. Their meticulous attention to detail and adaptability often led to improvements in manufacturing processes and product quality, challenging pre-war perceptions of industrial labor. The sheer volume of skilled labor unleashed by this societal shift provided an unparalleled surge in productivity, a critical factor in rapidly escalating American air power to levels unimaginable to the Axis command. It was a strategic advantage born not from a top-down ideological directive, but from the pragmatic necessity and democratic adaptability in the American system. This diverse, dedicated workforce proved that the front lines of production were just as vital as the battlefields, directly contributing to the overwhelming numerical and qualitative superiority that would ultimately decide the conflict. While American factories roared to an unprecedented pace, a stark and chilling reality began to dawn upon the very men who had once held undisputed mastery of the European skies. By late 1943 and throughout 1944, the strategic bombing campaigns unleashed by the Allied air forces escalated dramatically in both scale and ferocity. The Luftwaffe, once the cutting edge of the Blitzkrieg, found itself increasingly relegated to a defensive posture, outmatched not merely in technological innovation, but in sheer, overwhelming numerical superiority. General Adolf Galland, the highly decorated General der Jagdfliege, and a man intimately familiar with the realities of aerial combat, became one of the most vocal critics within the German High Command concerning this unsustainable trajectory. He repeatedly warned of the catastrophic attrition rates and the ever-widening disparity in operational aircraft. His frustration culminated in a famously despairing exchange with Reichsmarshal Göring, where Galland reportedly stated, "I asked for a fighter force to defend the Reich, Herr Reichsmarschall, not a fighter force to protect our bombers. The enemy is flying in such numbers it is impossible to count them." This was not hyperbole, it was a direct observation from a commander facing an existential threat. Major Johannes Steinhoff, another prominent Luftwaffe ace credited with 176 aerial victories, echoed these sentiments directly from the cockpit. He vividly described the profound psychological and tactical impact of engaging formations comprising hundreds of Allied bombers, meticulously escorted by an equally vast array of fighter aircraft. Every engagement was a battle against impossible odds, Steinhoff later recounted. Their formations stretched as far as the eye could see, wave after wave. The sheer density of Allied air power meant that even highly skilled German pilots were often overwhelmed by the sheer volume of targets and incoming fire. These were not merely the complaints of demoralized airmen. They represented the stark, professional assessments of experienced combat leaders, whose reports painted a grim picture of an air force being systematically consumed by a numerically superior adversary. Their grim prognosis served as a direct and irrefutable repudiation of Reichsmarschall Göring's earlier, arrogant dismissals of American industrial potential. His infamous declaration that the Americans could only produce refrigerators and razor blades now rang hollow, a monument to a catastrophic strategic miscalculation. The relentless waves of P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, B-17 Flying Fortresses, and B-24 Liberators were not just individual aircraft. They were the tangible, lethal manifestations of an industrial capacity that Germany, operating under a fundamentally different economic and political system, could neither match nor fully comprehend. The bitter truth for the Luftwaffe was that they were not merely fighting pilots and their machines, they were fighting entire production lines, tirelessly turning out tens of thousands of aircraft. Faced with this overwhelming, undeniable truth of Allied industrial supremacy, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, the architect of the Luftwaffe, found himself increasingly isolated and desperate. His earlier dismissals of American capacity had returned to haunt him as relentless formations of Allied bombers and fighters systematically dismantled Germany's conventional aircraft factories and infrastructure. In a last-ditch effort to preserve a semblance of fighter production, Göring authorized the Jägerstab, or Fighter Staff Program, in March 1944. This desperate initiative mandated a radical decentralization of aircraft manufacturing, moving vital production lines into vast bomb-proof underground facilities. Often repurposed mines, natural caves, or newly excavated subterranean complexes, these sites were intended to shield production from the relentless Allied strategic bombing campaigns. However, the core of this strategy was not innovation or efficiency, but rather the barbaric exploitation of human life. The immense labor required for excavation, construction, and assembly within these cramped, often unventilated underground tunnels was performed overwhelmingly by concentration camp prisoners and foreign slave laborers. These individuals, systematically brutalized, starved, and lacking any specialized training, were forced into industrial servitude. Their forced labor, performed under horrifying and inhumane conditions, was inherently unproductive and plagued by sabotage, low morale, and catastrophic levels of quality control. This grim reality stood in stark contrast to the American model, where highly skilled, well-compensated, and motivated workers, including a rapidly expanding female workforce, operated on streamlined, purpose-built assembly lines, continuously innovating and optimizing production processes. The logistical nightmares inherent in the Jägerstab program were almost insurmountable. Transporting raw materials, specialized components, and finished aircraft through subterranean labyrinths proved a constant bottleneck, exacerbating an already critical shortage of resources. Aircraft emerging from these hidden factories were frequently plagued by structural defects and mechanical failures, a direct consequence of the coerced, unskilled labor and the fragmented, often improvisational production environment. The colossal effort to construct and operate these facilities diverted immense resources, manpower, concrete, steel, and expert engineers away from the immediate frontline needs and other critical war industries. Despite the monumental human cost and the vast expenditure of resources, the Jägerstab program failed spectacularly to stem the tide of Allied air superiority, or significantly impact Germany's dwindling fighter output. While some aircraft were indeed produced, their numbers were insufficient, their quality suspect, and their deployment too late to alter the strategic calculus of the air war. The program became a chilling testament to a regime in its death throes, resorting to morally bankrupt, economically irrational measures, utterly detached from the pragmatic realities of modern industrial warfare, and ultimately proving the catastrophic inefficiency of an ideology built on hatred and coercion against the adaptive power of free enterprise and democratic mobilization. The quantitative dominance of American air power, while staggering, tells only part of the story. Equally critical was the qualitative edge derived from an unparalleled capacity for innovation and logistical mastery. The B-29 Superfortress exemplifies this approach, a marvel of engineering designed from the outset for modularity. Its segmented fuselage, interchangeable components, and standardized systems not only facilitated mass production, but also simplified maintenance and repair in forward theaters. This foresight meant that complex strategic bombers could be assembled and serviced with remarkable speed and efficiency, a stark contrast to the often bespoke, labor-intensive construction methods prevalent elsewhere. Furthermore, the American industrial apparatus established robust feedback loops, integrating combat intelligence directly into design and production cycles with an agility that Axis powers could not match. Reports from operational squadrons detailing vulnerabilities or desirable performance enhancements were rapidly assessed and translated into field modifications or successive production blocks. This iterative process allowed for continuous improvement, ensuring that aircraft designs remained relevant and effective against evolving enemy tactics. For instance, lessons learned from early B-17 missions over Europe directly informed armor plating adjustments, defensive armament upgrades, and oxygen system improvements for subsequent variants. This rapid adaptability was underpinned by a logistical network of immense scale and sophistication. The sheer volume of aircraft demanded an equally vast infrastructure for fuel, spare parts, munitions, and trained personnel, spanning 2 oceans and multiple continents. American logistics specialists orchestrated the movement of millions of tons of material, often pioneering new methods of packaging, shipping, and distribution. This global supply chain ensured that the thousands of aircraft reaching operational zones were not merely present, but fully combat-ready and sustainable for prolonged engagements. This holistic approach, combining innovative design, responsive modification, and superior logistical support, transformed America's numerical advantage into an overwhelming tactical and strategic superiority on every front. This theoretical advantage, forged in the furnaces of American industry, would find its most profound and devastating practical application on the battlefields of Western Europe. By June 6, 1944, the day of the Allied landings in Normandy, the scale of this air dominance was not merely significant, it was absolute. The skies over the invasion beaches and the vital logistical arteries behind them were effectively uncontested. For every single Luftwaffe aircraft capable of challenging the Allied aerial armada, there were approximately 36 Allied planes, a ratio of such disparity that it fundamentally reshaped the calculus of ground warfare. This overwhelming numerical supremacy translated directly into operational paralysis for the German defenders. Allied fighter bombers and medium bombers maintained an unceasing aerial interdiction campaign isolating the battlefield. German armored divisions, such as the veteran 21st Panzer, found their movements severely hampered, their columns strafed, and their fuel convoys destroyed. Bridges were systematically targeted, roads cratered, and rail networks rendered inoperable, preventing crucial reinforcements from reaching the beleaguered coastal defenses in a timely manner. Furthermore, Allied ground forces, from the moment they touched the beaches, benefited from unparalleled close air support. Fighter bombers engaged hardened strongpoints, suppressed artillery positions, and broke up counterattacks, often within minutes of a request from forward observers. This direct tactical support saved countless lives and accelerated the Allied advance inland. The ability to conduct unchallenged aerial reconnaissance provided Allied commanders with a real-time, comprehensive understanding of German dispositions and movements, a luxury utterly denied to the Axis. But the impact of America's industrial might in the air extended far beyond the immediate tactical gains of D-Day. The continuous, massive aerial campaigns that preceded and followed the invasion systematically dismantled Germany's war machine. Strategic bombing raids, conducted by thousands of heavy bombers escorted by long-range fighters, all products of that relentless American production line, targeted critical industrial choke points: synthetic oil plants, ball-bearing factories, aircraft production facilities, and the transportation infrastructure vital for their operation. This sustained assault choked the flow of vital resources to the German front line, starved the Luftwaffe of fuel and replacement aircraft, and crippled its ability to mount any meaningful aerial defense. The cumulative effect was a complete collapse of German industrial capacity and logistical coherence, rendering their ground forces increasingly vulnerable and immobile. The skies over Europe, once contested, became an Allied highway. The 36-to-1 air superiority on D-Day was not an isolated statistic, but the stark, undeniable manifestation of America's arsenal of democracy in full, devastating effect. It was the ultimate testament to the audacious plan, transforming industrial capacity into an irresistible force that shattered the Axis war effort from above. Following his capture, the once imperious Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring found himself not merely a prisoner of war, but a witness to the very industrial might he had so contemptuously underestimated. At the Nuremberg trials, stripped of his former power and confronted with irrefutable data, Göring's initial bravado slowly gave way to a chilling, albeit belated, recognition of the forces arrayed against the Third Reich. It was within the austere confines of the courtroom that the staggering reality of America's wartime production finally crystallized for him. He would later admit, with a profound sense of grim inevitability, that the industrial capacity of the United States, particularly the sheer scale of its aircraft output, far exceeded his worst fears. The specter of factories like Willow Run, once dismissed as a fantasy, now loomed large in his tortured admissions, representing an unfathomable torrent of combat aircraft. Göring grappled visibly with the statistics, reportedly stating that he had never believed such a volume of production was even remotely possible. This industrial juggernaut, capable of churning out an aircraft every 63 minutes at its peak, was, in his post-war testimony, a key, undeniable factor in Germany's catastrophic defeat. It was the overwhelming numerical superiority forged in the furnaces of American industry and projected with devastating effect across European skies that ultimately broke the back of the Luftwaffe and, by extension, the German war machine. By the close of World War II, the United States had achieved an industrial feat of unprecedented scale. A staggering total of 295,959 aircraft rolled off its production lines. This colossal output was far more than a statistic. It represented the culmination of an industrial miracle, a strategic weapon forged in the crucible of conflict that proved to be the decisive factor in the Allied victory. This achievement served as a profound validation of democratic systems and market-driven economies. Unlike the rigid, ideologically constrained, and often inefficient command structures of the Axis powers, the American model demonstrated an unparalleled capacity for innovation, rapid adaptation, and decentralized problem-solving. It showcased the strength derived from voluntary mobilization, the entrepreneurial spirit, and the collective ingenuity of a free society, which ultimately outmaneuvered and overwhelmed its authoritarian adversaries. The strategic implications of this industrial dominance were immense. The sheer scale and efficiency of American wartime production cemented the United States' position as the preeminent global power, effectively ushering in what would come to be known as the American century. This era was defined not only by military might, but economic influence and technological leadership, all rooted in the productive capacity demonstrated during the war. Furthermore, this period fundamentally revolutionized global manufacturing practices. The principles of mass production, standardization, interchangeable parts, and complex logistical coordination, perfected in facilities like Willow Run, transcended their wartime application. They became the blueprint for post-war industrial expansion, influencing production methodologies, supply chain management, and assembly line techniques across virtually every sector worldwide. The lessons learned in accelerating output, improving quality under immense pressure, and integrating diverse components into a cohesive system laid the foundation for modern industrial engineering. The enduring legacy of this arsenal of democracy was not merely the defeat of tyranny, but the establishment of a new paradigm for industrial power and a compelling blueprint for future global influence. The statistical reality of America's wartime production is staggering, a final tally of 295,959 aircraft, each one a testament to an industrial miracle. But beyond the sheer numbers, this extraordinary achievement offers profound, enduring lessons for strategists and nations alike. The primary among them is the perilous danger of underestimating the industrial and innovative capacity of free democratic societies. Göring's initial scoff, rooted in totalitarian arrogance and racial prejudice, proved to be an ideological blind spot that led to catastrophic strategic miscalculations. He failed to grasp that a free market, driven by entrepreneurial spirit and fueled by a diverse, adaptable workforce, could pivot with unprecedented speed and scale when united by a national imperative. Arsenal of democracy was not merely about raw materials or labor. It was about the fundamental adaptability of its system. Unlike the rigid, centrally controlled, and often inefficient German war economy, the American model allowed for rapid innovation, competitive drive, and the decentralized problem-solving that transformed civilian industries into war production powerhouses. The lessons extend to the critical importance of strategic foresight and national mobilization in times of crisis. Roosevelt's audacious vision, combined with the pragmatic leadership of figures like William Knudsen, demonstrated that a nation, when fully committed and intelligently directed, can achieve seemingly impossible feats of industrial transformation. These historical precedents serve as a potent reminder. Underestimating the resilience, ingenuity, and sheer will of a mobilized free society remains a misjudgment with potentially devastating consequences, a lesson that transcends the battlefields of the Second World War and resonates profoundly in the strategic landscape today.